Well, today I might go ahead and reassemble my fuel distributor. Since the last video, I did submerge these halves completely in acetone. I actually forced it through all of the ports on the top half. This is pretty clean now. Ideally I should have removed those, and I may still do that today. This side, on the other hand, yeah, some varnish has appeared back inside here after I've cleaned it, so obviously there is some garbage hiding inside here. I'm going to disassemble this a bit more. I really don't want to touch those 6 individual plugs and the screws that adjust the flow rate to each cylinder, because that requires messing around to get that correct again. I may have to do that. We shall see. If I can find the source of this mysterious filth that has appeared again, I will clean it out. If not, it must be hiding in there somewhere. So I will take these off, these 2 connections, and have a look, see what's inside there, if anything is hiding. I did take out the remaining connections on this, and that didn't really reveal anything more to me. So I'm thinking the varnish is actually hiding underneath these caps here. So I'm just going to take one of them out and have a look, because the threads on these adjusters are actually coarse enough that the fuel could indeed have soaked down through them over the years. And that's probably why these plugs have got seal rings on them as well. So if these are indeed full of varnish, well, I think that's the reason why you're supposed to clean this out properly. I will take them off and I'll measure them if required and reinstall them. So I'm just going to try one for now, as long as I can do this by hand without going and getting my proper Allen keys. And yes, I could. And yes, I can see that is wet, and it absolutely stinks like varnish. So I think I have my answer there, but I'm still going to try and avoid taking those out. I might measure them and then wash them in situ and see if that adjusts them at all. I'll get back to you after I've done that and we'll see what happens. Right, all of those plugs are out now, and that did reveal quite the horror show. One of them was still filled with a disgusting liquid. So I've also gone ahead and measured the depth from the bottom side. That's not actually recommended. They want you to measure it from the top side. I can only imagine that's so you don't have to ensure that the original screw goes back where it comes from. I don't have a suitable straight edge to measure from the other side, so I did measure from the bottom. I will just make sure that the same screws go back exactly where they were. I'm not 100% happy doing this because I don't have the best tools that are the most accurate devices on earth to set this up again, but I would imagine it's going to be pretty close. Right, so I changed my mind again about removing those screws because I did actually clean the back side out and the top side again, and I've measured them again and they haven't moved. So rather than worry about the possibility of some varnish trapped in the threads, I don't really care. I'm just going to assemble it. I don't have measuring tools accurate enough to set them back exactly where they were. You're talking hundredths of a millimeter there, and I'm just never going to get that right, so I'd rather just leave it alone. It worked before, really it just needed to be cleaned, and that's what I've done here. And it's going to get a new diaphragm as well, and the barrel and its O-rings, everything is going to be new, so I'm confident this is going to work anyway. If in future I happen to buy myself another ultrasonic cleaner and some better measuring equipment, I can certainly do this in future, but for now I think it's better to err on the side of caution and just leave it alone. So I'm going to reassemble this bottom half now, and then I can continue on with the top. The top does have these little filter screens inside the outlets, and I do actually have those with the rebuild kit from Australia. I haven't worked out how to actually remove the old ones yet, but admittedly I haven't tried, so I'm going to have a go at that now with a screwdriver and see how successful that is. I'll show you what worked, if indeed I am able to get them out. So in summary, I did end up chickening out on the subject of removing those adjuster screws. I have cleaned them out on the back side, and I've reinstalled their plugs. So I'm not going to do anything more with that. I'm happy with that, and it's time to move on. I couldn't quite work out how to remove those filters. I may ask the provider of the kit if he knows a better way. I can probably still change those after the thing is assembled anyway. So I'm going to move on to the barrel now. As is mentioned in the manual, they suggest shining a bright light up the interior of this barrel just to check the status of each of the very fine slits inside. I can confirm that even without using an ultrasonic cleaner and just soaking this thing in acetone, it is absolutely perfectly clean. There's no obstructions in those slits whatsoever. I'll try and set up the microscope to give you a better view of that, because I can't really do it at the moment while I'm holding the phone, just to give you an idea what it should look like. Obviously this thing is not as bad as I thought it was, so maybe it was just a case of varnish getting in there. So I'll take you to the microscope now and you can have a look for yourself. So this is what the barrel slits look like underneath the microscope. There's not a massive amount of magnification occurring here. You can actually see these with the naked eye if your eyesight is still good. Fortunately, I'm almost 40 and my eyes are still fine, so I can see them, and I could see them clearly just by shining the light up the middle of the barrel. That's what they suggest doing, and yeah, I didn't see anything in any of those slits. I believe those white marks are probably just stains from the cleaning process. I don't think they're anything to be concerned about. So with this barrel I've gone ahead and installed this O-ring. He does specifically mention to make sure, even though you do have to roll it to get it there, to make sure it's in its natural position when it's there and not rolled over, because that will impair its function. Rolling it's kind of unavoidable since it's quite a tight fit to get it on there. I'm pretty sure that's the right O-ring. There's nothing else even close to it in the kit, so pretty much has to be it. Next, it's a case of installing the filter. Can't remember in which direction it was on. I don't know that it makes any difference. Hopefully it doesn't get destroyed now. Carefully I install that. It does have to go down to this area here, so I've probably gone the long way, and no doubt more risky way, but that's on. So I can go ahead and install those snap rings as well. Okay, that barrel is completely assembled now, and I can go ahead and install that in the lower half of the fuel distributor. It was quite annoying getting those snap rings back on. That filter does want to bend with the slightest pressure applied to it, so fortunately I didn't break it, but you've got to use care when you're doing this. I would imagine it wouldn't take much to break that. So the next step, it advises to actually install the O-ring that sits in the bottom groove inside this lower housing, and that does come with the kit. So I'm just going to grease that up with silicone grease and put that in. So that O-ring is nice and greased up now. And they advise that installing it from the bottom might be easier, but I can't see how that's the case. It's actually a smaller opening, so I'm just going to try and put that in from this side. See how that goes. And that has gone into its groove quite successfully. I don't know if you can see that or not, but that's in perfectly. So I believe I can now consider putting that barrel in there. Right, so it's time to install that barrel. One thing I didn't actually write down was the position of this mark on the barrel. It has to go back exactly where it was. I had to re-watch my own video to see where that was, because I forgot to write it down. It is actually pointing to this part of the distributor here. So I'll just press that in now and make sure that's as close as I can get it. And they do mention when you're pushing that in, it should feel like it's seating on rubber and not a metal on metal type fit. I'm just trying to eyeball each of those slits to make sure that they line up with each of those chambers. And the kerf mark is bang on where it needs to be as well. So I can now just push that in and hopefully it seats. There we go. I did mention it already, but there is silicone grease particularly on that housing O-ring, so it doesn't drag on this when you push it in. That's one way to destroy new O-rings if they're not lubricated. So that's now in. I can continue on with the next steps. The next step is to reinstall these little spring things. Now I do recall that the opening was at the bottom, so I'm just going to make sure they go back in the same way. I think that's how they all go, because that's even how the manual has it depicted as well. Of course, I may not be able to do these with my hand. If so, I will grab my needle nose pliers. No, that's gone in. One down, 6 more to go. Once they're in, it's time to install the O-rings. So I'll get the other 5 of those installed off camera and I'll be right back. So those 6 springs are now installed. It's time to go ahead and install the O-rings that sit on those as well. So I'll try to do one of those on camera. Failing that, I'll just do them off camera and show you the finished product. Now it's important that the rubber sits higher than the spring. I don't think that's going to be a problem because they do sit in a recess, and that first one has already gone on correctly, so this is really not rocket science. I shall just continue doing the rest. This is one reason I don't like wearing gloves, because you lose a lot of sensation. I like to work with my hands because it's quite accurate. So that's all of those installed now, and I shall read the manual and see what the next step is. So the next step is to install the lower spring cups on all 6 and their springs as well, and the little valve plate thing that sits on top of that. Now I need to make sure they go back exactly where they came from. This is where my 6 crappy coffee cups come in handy. There's a little note in each of them stating from which cylinder the parts came from. I did this on my blue-black car as well, and that fuel distributor works perfectly. So I'll just do one of these on camera, and then I'll do the rest off camera, and then come back when that's done. Just in my drawing, I know this isn't cylinder 1, or probably isn't, I don't know, but in my drawing it is cylinder 1 anyway. It's as easy as that. And of course there is the disc as well. So yes, I shall go ahead and do the rest of those off camera, and then it's time to drop the new diaphragm on. And I'm just putting on the final one now. Do remember that in the manual they suggest to not even touch these adjustment screws by hand because they can turn so easily. That has not been the case on this thing. I've touched them 1,000 times, they haven't moved at all. Maybe these ones are locked in place with varnish. I don't care. I don't want to touch them. So there we have it. That's all 6 of the lower parts installed. Now I can go ahead and drop the diaphragm on. One thing for our friend in Queensland to make note of, his packaging is actually leaving wood dust on the new diaphragm. I don't know if he's aware of that, but I will let him know, because he does actually package a piece of wood in there for safe transport, and that's leaving dust all over the diaphragm, as you can see there, and you really want to clean that off before putting that on, otherwise it's probably not going to seal properly. With the diaphragm, it can only go on one way, because there are an odd number of, or odd placement of holes around that center barrel. So if you put it on the wrong way, one of those holes will not line up with the diaphragm. I was wondering which way to do it, and then realized one of the holes had nowhere to go, so you definitely can only put that on one way. This diaphragm from Australia does already have indents in the diaphragm. I remember the one I got from the USA did not, so it's obviously a different manufacturer. The next step is to partially install that top half, and then you go ahead and put in those springs and discs. So I'll give that a go and see how that goes. Now, if you remember from the first part of this project, I did mention that I'm using 2 different manuals from the 2 different providers of these rebuild kits. The other manual suggests using silicone grease on these actual ceramic or plastic discs, whatever they're made out of, to successfully move them around on this diaphragm, and it kind of holds them in place ready for the installation. The other guy says to basically push it in from the side when you've got the upper and lower chambers partially assembled. I think that's what he's talking about anyway. So I'm going to go with this silicone grease method and see how that goes. It does mention to actually assemble the disc and spring first. Apparently the spring locks into that disc and you should be able to move it around in the air without it falling to pieces. So that's the disc from cylinder number 1, well, according to my diagram anyway. And there you go. Yes, it does. So I'll just grease that up now and place that in position. I don't know what the correct quantity is to use, but I'm guessing just enough. I don't think you should probably go overboard with the amount of grease because it might actually upset the adjustment. Well, that didn't work. That was an epic fail. Might actually clean that diaphragm and try again, because I don't really want grease in any other part where it shouldn't be. So yes, I make mistakes as well. Okay, now that spring is successfully attached, and I'll do the rest and come back shortly. I will clean up that mess that I've made as well. Right, well, I'm just going to come right out and say that I think this method sucks, because I dropped another one and made a mess on my diaphragm as well. So that's all 6 of those plates and springs just resting there at the moment in approximately the correct locations. I'm just going to clean off that excess grease that I've made a mess with, and then I will come back, and it is probably time to start pushing the halves together, watching very carefully to make sure that those discs are in the correct location, because if you clamp it down and they're in the wrong place, they're going to break and it's game over then. So that's the really critical time to make sure things are going back together correctly. Right, this is actually the second time I'm trying to put this together. I did actually have or make a catastrophic screw up. Not catastrophic in the way that it's not damaged anything, but I had the top half in the wrong direction when I installed it. I forgot that there are these cutouts, upper and lower, and that's how you know you've got them in the correct orientation. So I can go ahead and install that now. One word of caution, it's not really easy to do this on camera. I don't think I'll be able to do it. I'll try anyway, but you really need to be looking in from the sides when you're pushing this down to make sure it's dead straight, otherwise those O-rings just fall off that center barrel. And obviously you want to make sure that all of these springs are in the correct position and nothing falls out. And once it closes the whole way, you know you're home and hosed and it's ready to screw together. If there's any gaps, then something's not seated right. Fortunately, when I pulled it apart the second time, I didn't drop everything, so everything is still in its correct orientation. So yes, I make mistakes as well, and that one could have been devastating, but no damage has been done. I haven't torn the diaphragm, haven't destroyed anything. So I'm going to have another go on camera at installing this, but I don't like my chances. I think I'm going to have to do it off camera. And shit, I'm actually getting good at this now. Although I still put it on crooked, you can fix that pretty easily. So that is on, or started to get on. I can start actually pushing that down. And I did find to make sure the diaphragm is in the correct location the first time I tried to do this and completely screwed it up. Just having the bolts through the bottom half does keep that diaphragm in position. You'll know for certain you've not done the upper and lower halves in the correct direction because the bolts do not go in. That's what made me realise, what the hell is going on here? This is just not going together. And then I realised, once again, after looking at my own video, because I didn't take enough notes because I was too busy talking, that I had it the wrong way around. That went on a lot easier that time. It's a miracle what happens when you actually do things the right way. Springs and valves are, all except one, still seated correctly. Maybe two are not seated properly. I'm just going to drop that a bit further down. Once I have, I'll give you a closer look. This is not something that is camera friendly, unfortunately. Anyway, I'll give you a look at that now. I'm not sure how well this will come across on the camera, but that is the two halves. Basically ready to push down, and I've made sure that those springs and seated or ceramic discs are in the correct locations. Obviously it's okay to hold this on its side at the moment because the springs are pushing against each other. And if it closes up successfully like that, I'm pretty sure nothing is being crushed. But I will just double check that off camera. Because I had to take this off a second time, I did actually just put this on here to stop the barrel falling out. Something to bear in mind if you screw it up as well. So yeah, I'll just double check that, and then maybe it's time to screw it together. We shall see. Right, so both of those halves have gone together. There's no gaps there. There was nothing being crushed, thankfully. Screws were not difficult to install. They bottomed out pretty quickly. So I'm pretty confident there's nothing that's being pinched between the two halves there that shouldn't be. Only time will tell when it's time to start the red engine. I have done this before. This is exactly how I rebuilt the one on my blue-black car, and that's working absolutely perfectly. I never touched those adjustment screws either, because once again I don't have accurate enough measuring equipment to set that correctly again. That idles perfectly smooth. And on that one as well, I pulled those spring cups off with my fingers and it never even adjusted them at all. So I'm not sure what they're talking about with them being easy to turn. Maybe some versions are, but these two that I have rebuilt, those screws didn't move at all. And I did measure them again after playing with them, and it didn't change. So anyway, I will now torque these screws up to spec. It is mentioned in there, and it's then time to install that piston. I'll make sure that kerf is still in its correct location, and then we're pretty much done for now. I'm not going to install the EHO valve yet. I'm just going to put this in a bag, yeah, and wait till it's time to start up that red engine. Hopefully it won't be too much longer. Right, so these screws I've done up to 7 Newton meters. The spec, according to the manual here, is 7 to 10. I'm not sure where they got that figure from because you're not actually supposed to open these up anyway. But because I didn't quite have the correct size Torx bit, I had to use one slightly smaller, which is a definite no-no. I just stuck with 7 Newton meters. So now I'm ready to drop that piston into the barrel. I have lubricated it. They suggest to use engine oil. I've just decided to use spray lubricant. And that should go in nice and perfectly. That is ridiculously fine tolerances there. There's no play whatsoever. It's just an absolutely perfect fit. And that's how it ensures that, I guess, minimal fuel leaks past that. So I'm going to reuse this shim that locks it into place, if I remember which way it goes. According to this manual, this goes on first before that center adjusting piece. I don't remember doing it that way. And the torque for this apparently is next to nothing, 3 to 5 Newton meters. I'm not going to have anything of that size to be able to do that. So I'm just going to tighten that up by hand to what I think feels correct. And then we'll go ahead and install that central piece with its new O-ring. And I'll set the depth of that. And I think we're done. Here's a little life hack I discovered. And I did forget to mark the kerf location on this. It was a couple of degrees out because I adjusted by eye. This shim told the story. It still has the shape of the nut in the dirt on that shim, and when I had tightened it up, it didn't line up with that marking, so I readjusted that barrel just by tapping the kerf to get it to rotate, so it's now bang on pointing to that cylinder. And now when that nut is locked in the position it needs to be, it aligns perfectly with the dirt marks on there, so that's a nice little recovery there. A couple of degrees wouldn't have made a difference anyway, I would hope, but now it's 100% bang on, so I'm happy with that now. Just be careful not to destroy that piston in the process. I just used a precision screwdriver, this one here, plastic, and tapped on it with my spanner. That was enough to get it to rotate just those couple of degrees. So it's not exactly a loose fit, but that worked. So now it's time to install that centerpiece with its new O-ring. And it does come in the kit. It's a strange looking O-ring. I have no idea where they'd be finding those. It must be custom made. And I'm hopeful it only goes on one way. I really don't know. Yeah, it definitely doesn't go that way, so it must go the other way. Yep, that's it. That doesn't actually seal against the piston. The piston is relying on its ridiculously fine manufacturing tolerances to stop the fuel leaking past it. So that is actually sealing against the inside of the barrel. There really isn't anything sealing that piston. That's interesting, because that does actually leak on my car, on my blue-black car, so that would mean that the piston is leaking around the barrel. I'm not sure you can do anything about that. Although, when the piston is the whole way down, it does, I guess, seal against this. Maybe that's the idea. So in the idle or off position, it shouldn't leak. Maybe that's what it is. I'm not an expert on these things. I'm just an enthusiast like everybody else, but I probably have done things on a little more ridiculous scale than most people have. So I'm going to try and install this. I have a feeling this is not the time to put it in. I think the nut should have gone on first, but I could be wrong. I will try this off camera. That is now exactly as it was, or close enough to when I pulled it apart. And that piston is not binding. Even with no fuel pressure, it is coming out. Not that that's a big deal. Once that's under pressure, that should actually come out with a reasonable amount of force, I would imagine. So now I'm just going to put this in a bag, and until I've got fuel injectors and a accumulator for my rear pump cage, there's not really much else I can do on the fuel system. I do need to have some hoses rebuilt, and I need to flush out all of the crap in the metal lines that are running to the engine bay, because as I mentioned, that original tank was complete garbage. So all of that varnish and crap is still in the fuel system. I have got a new tank, but I still need to clean out those lines. So I'll have to pump some cleaning solvent through them and then blow it out. But that's a job for another day. That's pretty much it for now. I think the next thing I'm going to work on is the transmission. I do have a 4-day weekend coming up, so that's probably what I'm going to do then. For now, that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and one day we'll find out if this worked. I guess I could try it on my blue-black car, but I'm not that enthusiastic about pulling that apart for no damn good reason. So we'll just try it out on the red engine once it's ready to go and see what happens.